Hi, I'm Mary Leitner, and I'm president of the Public Policy Network. And I'm really pleased to be able to present this program tonight because medical cannabis has been a topic that's been in the news, and there's been a lot written about it, and a lot of it's pretty confusing, I think. So we have three really fine panelists who have been tracking what's been going on in both of our states, in North Carolina and Georgia, both what's been happening in the state legislature and other forums where there's public policies. So they're going to fill you in on fact versus fiction, and we'll be able to answer your questions at the end. And our first presenter is Rachel Grano, and I'm going to let her tell you about how medical cannabis became important to her. But she had some personal experiences that led her to explore it, and she found it extremely beneficial and ended up starting a business to help other people. Then we have Greg and Terry Thrower, and we are really fortunate to have them involved in PPN. Terry is the chair of our healthcare committee, and Greg is on the steering committee. And Terry gave a really, really great presentation about her experience with opioids last year when we had several panel presentations on opioids. Terry is a low THC medical cannabis oil patient registered in Georgia, and prior to coming here to Georgia, she and her husband Greg lived in Chicago, Illinois, where they first began trying cannabis for its medical properties to help Terry with her pain. Terry holds a PhD in disability studies from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and bachelor and master's degrees in rehabilitation counseling, and has lived most of her life with disability, blindness, and chronic illness. In 2016, she suffered from cervical spondylosis and permanently injured her spinal cord and underwent surgery, fusion surgery, to prevent paralysis. In early 2017, she was able to stop taking prescription opioids for pain and switch to medical cannabis only. And that was the year that she and Greg moved to Georgia to take advantage of their newly formed medical cannabis program. Greg spent most of his professional life in computer system designs and management for the healthcare, petroleum, casino, hotel, and pharmaceutical industries. He holds a BA in business administration and a master's in leadership. He has been her primary caregiver and editor while she's recovered from spinal injuries, and completes a memoir on the healthcare industry. They have both been active in promoting Georgia legislation to allow the cultivation, production, and distribution of medical cannabis within the state. So we're going to start today. We're going to have the perspective from both states, which we're trying really hard to do in our presentation. Rachel being from North Carolina and Greg and Terry being from Georgia. So I will just turn it over to you and look forward to hearing all you have to say.
Hey, hi everybody. My name is Rachel Grano, and I live in Brasstown, North Carolina, which I moved back to recently in the past couple of years from California. In California, I was a medical cannabis patient, where it was legal for me to use cannabis as my medicine. And I own a house in Brasstown. I grew up there. And I have a young child who's 5, and we wanted to move back for a better place to grow up. And unfortunately, my medicine that was legal in California is illegal across a different state line. A little bit about why I started using cannabis. I was involved in a motor vehicle accident. Basically, my neck became very stiff. I was unable to turn it, and I didn't heal well. I didn't heal in like the normal amount of time that doctors would think that I should heal. So I did about a year of physical therapy with not getting better, till finally I got a fibromyalgia diagnosis, which is why they said I was not healing. So I was living in severe pain. I was on several medications. Every time I went back to the doctor, I got prescribed something new and hoping that would help, and just one thing on top of another with more symptoms and more inflammation, more weight gain, more depression, more anxiety. My life was just spiraling down the toilet basically, and I have a small daughter to care for who I couldn't care for that well, and somebody recommended medical cannabis, and I had dabbled in it, as a kid. I smoked marijuana as a teenager, when I say as a kid, that's what I mean, but I wasn't a stranger to it, but it wasn't something that I was using in my life currently as a parent and, working for a corporation. But being unable to work and on all these medications, I tried and integrated into my life. And it worked so well that I was actually able to titrate myself off over 10 prescription medications, including opioids. I paired it with an anti-inflammatory diet and lost over 60 pounds. And I have a much better quality of life today, thanks to medical cannabis. So that's where I am, that's who I am, and this is why I'm passionate about it. And I know how much it helped me, and I see other people suffer. As I mentioned, I even created a business called Mother's Hemp, where I make my own CBD products, which are legal in all 50 states, to at least help. We'll go over some of the cannabinoids and such in the presentation, but we'll just get started, I guess. So today we have the Medical Cannabis panel. We'll explore THC, CBD, and how it affects the body. So part one, we're going to do an introduction, a little bit about myself. I kind of already did that part. A history, cannabinoids, THC, and CBD and their therapeutic value, and research and resources. So this is a little thing I like to say to people. The most dangerous part of the cannabis plant are the laws governing us. And you'll see why in our presentation a little bit down the road here. I wanted to start with some definitions of the terms that we use, because it can be a little fuzzy and they seem interchangeable, but really they're not. Cannabis is the botanical name for Cannabis sativa L, which is given to the plant. It's in botanical books. It was actually a part of even the pharmacopoeia before it was removed in the 40s due to the legislation. The next term is marijuana. Now, marijuana is not a botanical term. It is a legal term that the government created to use to call cannabis. And it is defined as any THC above 0.3%. Now, hemp, which basically they call them cousins, it is cannabis as well. Both plants are cannabis, but one has very high THC and low CBD, which is marijuana, and one has very high CBD and low THC, which is hemp. This is just a little brief history of cannabis, looking back through the years, kind of what got us to this state of prohibition that we're in. There's documentation between 6000 and 2000 BC that shows worldwide documented uses of seeds, textiles, medicinal, and recreational purposes. Even in 1619, the Virginia Assembly passed legislation requiring every farmer to grow hemp, and it was allowed to be exchanged as legal tender in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland. Now, in 1937, this is where things started to get a little hairy. This is when they really started to get it out for their newly coined term marijuana, which unfortunately was a bit of a racial targeted scare tactic that was used to, at the time there were a lot of immigrants coming in, there were a lot of Hispanics that people were in fear of losing their jobs to, and the special interest parties like the paper industry that saw a threat from hemp. Harry Anslinger, he was a gentleman who was a part of the alcohol enforcement, and prohibition for alcohol had just ended, so he didn't have anything else to focus on. And they all kind of made this their special pet project, where they got the Marijuana Tax Act to pass by the recently formed Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And they push the legislation with propaganda. I'm sure many of you have seen it, maybe pictures from the past of, it'll make you crazy, it'll, make people do things that they wouldn't normally do, and, now we know this is not true. Here we're looking at between about in the 50s and 80s, the enactment of federal laws setting mandatory sentences for drug-related offenses, including cannabis. This was that Bush-Reagan War on Drugs campaign that they rolled out, and they really targeted marijuana, and they did a mandatory sentence of 2 to 5 years for simple possession of a plant. Come 1996, this is when we started to have some changes come about. California Prop 215, they were the first state to adopt medical cannabis program. It was approved as a painkiller for AIDS and cancer. Now currently there are 33 states plus DC that have a medical program in place. So that is over half of our United States. North Carolina is not one of them, unfortunately, and as you'll see in our presentation, Georgia has one, but it's not very well thought out. And there are 10 states plus DC that are completely recreational. You can go to that state, you can not have a medical card, you can walk into a store, you can buy marijuana or hemp or whatever you want and do with it as you please. Each state is a little bit different on as far as the medical of what they allow. Some states are very particular, you can only use an oil. Some states say you can only use, you can't use concentrate. Some say you can't use edibles. So from state to state it really varies in the medical programs. Next I want to talk about what are cannabinoids. Maybe some people have heard this term, maybe you haven't. There are over 113 identified in the cannabis plant. And they're finding more and more as the studies roll out that each of them has their own medicinal value to us. I know a couple popular ones you may have heard of are CBD, which is cannabidiol, and THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol. You'll see there's a THCA and a CBDA, and what those are the plant in its raw acid form before it's heated. For instance, marijuana, the THC is not psychoactive until it is heated. So they're finding that the THCA acid form actually has a lot of great benefits health-wise as well. There's a lot of people in the states that do have programs or recreational uses that actually juice the plant for its medicinal value. So a little bit more about cannabinoids. They are the active chemicals in cannabis. They are similar to those produced by our bodies. So yes, our bodies produce these as well, and those are called endocannabinoids. The cannabinoids from the plant are called phytocannabinoids, meaning plant. They're received by our endocannabinoid system, which is a signaling system responsible for regulating memory, mood, appetite, and pain control, and many more. You can see there's a little infographic of the endocannabinoid system and just a few more things that it regulates there. And in case you guys can't see it well, I'll read it to you as well. Pain, appetite, sensation, inflammation, thermoregulation, eye ocular pressure, mood, energy, metabolism, stress response, muscle control, motivation, and reward. So this system is literally the boss. It is the one in charge of all the other systems in your body. And this system, it wasn't even discovered until 1992 by Dr. Raphael Michelom. He came across it when he was studying THC and its effects and realized that we actually have these receptors in our body designed to accept cannabinoids because our body produces them themselves. Our brain produces one called anandamide, and that one is known as the bliss molecule. It closely resembles THC, so our body actually makes its own THC. Funny enough, that just like other conditions where people might not get enough of a certain, dopamine perhaps, or you've heard of people not getting enough serotonin. So there could be people deficient in endocannabinoids as well, and there's a lot of research being looked at for that as well. A little bit about tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. It is psychoactive. It can produce an intoxicating like euphoria in high doses. Some people appreciate it, some people don't like it. It's found primarily in marijuana. Like I said, to be defined as hemp, it must be below 0.3 THC, which is a very small amount. And we talked about its legality a little bit. CBD, or cannabidiol, is mildly psychoactive. Now, there's some people that say it's not psychoactive at all. Now, that's not true completely, because it does change your headspace a little bit. If you're stressed out and you take something and it reduces your stress, wouldn't you say that changed your state of mind? So that would make it technically psychoactive, but it's not intoxicating. It doesn't produce the euphoria or the intoxication that the high THC doses can. And that one is legal in all 50 states. Recently there was legislation with a 2018 Farm Bill that removed it from the Controlled Substances Act, where it was basically put with LSD and heroin as far as the most dangerous substances. This next slide, this shows the benefits of each cannabinoid. I'm not sure how well you guys can see those. I think we're going to make these available to you after as well. But there's basically a whole list of, an analgesic, an anti-arthritic, antibacterial, anti-convulsive, anti-diabetic. The list kind of goes on of all the things it might help with. And it tells you which cannabinoid is helpful. As you can see, CBD kind of takes the whole row almost. There's only a couple things it doesn't help with. It's practically like a... basically, I think of it as a superfood because it has so many benefits to it and so many applications. But as you can see in this chart, it's very imperative that there are a lot of conditions that THC and even THCA are very beneficial for as well. This kind of leads to talk about the human endocannabinoid system a little bit further. Like I said, in 1992 we discovered we even had this. The best way that they've explained it is that it fits like a lock and key into our receptors, and it fits perfectly. THC and CBN fits directly while CBD works indirectly. It actually kind of helps your body produce more of its own, if you could look at it that way. The receptors are found primarily in the brain and the peripherals. We have two types, CB1 and CB2. The only place that they are not prevalent is on the brainstem, which is unique because the brainstem is what controls respirations and heart rate. So if you don't have receptors for it on that area, is why you cannot overdose on it. However, you do have a plethora of opioid receptors on your brainstem, which is why if you take too much of an opioid, you could stop breathing and die. So a little bit more about whole plant medicine and the entourage effect. Now this is where we talk about the whole plant working together. So we have the cannabinoids that we talked about, like the CBD and the THC. Terpenes, now terpenes are what gives the plant a smell, like when you smell a rose or you smell lavender or you smell any kind of a plant, that's a terpene. So cannabis has that too, that's why it's got such an aroma to it, because it has so many terpenes. And what they're finding out is these terpenes actually work with these cannabinoids to produce a better effect for the body. So not only does THC and CBD, when paired together, work really well together, but these terpenes and even flavonoids and chlorophyll and other parts of the plant have been found to be very beneficial as well. This next slide is, I took this off online. This must be somewhere in Alaska. They have a medical, I think they're even recreational there. But they had a nice list showing a psychoactivity scale of how a different ratio of CBD versus THC would produce different effects for people and what conditions would benefit from those sorts of ratios. So CBD alone has a very low to none psychoactivity, and a lot of people find that stress, anxiety, epilepsy, mild inflammation, if you have a THC intolerance or just wanting to gain more focus, and even autism have been shown very well with CBD alone. Now there'd be, say, a 20 to 1, so that would be 20 part CBD, 1 part THC. That's very low. And again, that kind of hits some of the same things with a few more. Then it goes to a 10 to 1, a 3 to 1, a 1 to 1. Now a 1 to 1, they have fibromyalgia listed there. That's what I actually found to be the best for my condition, is a 1 to 1 ratio. And when CBD and THC work together, CBD buffers and counteracts a lot of the side effects, like the stronger side effects that THC produces. In fact, when the plant was, before it was bred selectively due to the legislation, and growers were seeking the black market, and THC is where the money was at. So they bred these plants to be super high in THC and lost a lot of the CBD along the way. Not knowing that CBD was so valuable, it wasn't discovered until later on. So now they're finding that if the plant's more balanced and you have a balance of THC and CBD, you're not going to get a lot of the strong effects as you would as THC alone, because it buffers it. Research and resources, diving deeper. So cannabis research has been widely obstructed and therefore limited in the U.S. due to federal prohibition. There would be no funding, scientists are afraid to get in trouble. There's one farm in Mississippi that the government grew some very swag stuff there to, not in a medicinal value. You know, they didn't really understand what they were doing, they're just kind of growing it, and that's the government's testing program that they had to kind of look at. But there were a few along the way that were funded. So we have a little fact or myth for you guys to see what you might think here. Smoking cannabis causes brain damage and lung cancer. Fact or myth? Myth. That was a federally funded and flawed study. We had a Dr. Heath that produced these findings showing that the active ingredient THC in cannabis impairs brain circuitry. Well, the author of a great book called Smoke Signals, A Social History of Marijuana by Martin Lee, he describes and looks a little bit further into these tests that were done over the years. This is a quote from him. Shackled in airtight gas masks, Heath's monkeys were regularly forced to inhale the equivalent of 63 high-potency marijuana cigarettes in 5 minutes. Lo and behold, the primates suffered from brain damage, from suffocation, and carbon monoxide poisoning. But Heath attributed the results to marijuana toxicity. Now, this is a study that was in the 70s, and this is when they ran with it. Politicians, this came out, and they said, oh, that's it. It causes brain damage. This is your brain on drugs type thing. Marijuana was lumped right there with it. And unfortunately, this was a flawed study that was paid for by the U.S. Dr. Tashkin, he led the largest case control study ever done on the subject of lung cancer. And he concluded that smoking cannabis, even frequently and in large amounts, does not lead to lung cancer, which according to Dr. Tashkin were against our expectations. We hypothesized that there would be a positive association between marijuana use and lung cancer, and that the association would be more positive with heavier use. What we found instead was no association at all, and even a suggestion of some protective effect. So much so that the government became enlightened at some point in 2003 enough to file a patent for cannabinoids that they lump into the heroin and LSD, no medicinal value. Yes, so that right there is like, what? How is this possible? So they have filed a patent on those, but they say they have no value. Okay, fact or myth? Marijuana is a gateway drug. I think this is another one that we see a lot of. This one too, myth. Research shows that marijuana could more accurately be described as a terminus drug because of the vast majority of people who use marijuana do not go on to use other illicit drugs. And this was the Drug Policy Alliance in February 2017. Also, Dr. Abrams from UCSF found that cannabis makes opioid drugs more effective, allowing smaller opioid doses to provide the same level of pain relief with correspondingly lower side effects and danger of dependence. And this was in 2011. So these studies are coming out. We're realizing this is helping with opioids, but do you think there's anybody out there that doesn't want us to know this, or doesn't want... I think there's a special interest group that has been trying to keep all this away from us. This next slide here actually shows that JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association Internal Medicine, researchers looked at medical cannabis laws and death certificate data in all 50 states between the years of 1999 and 2010. During that time, only 13 states had medical cannabis laws in place, but researchers quickly noticed that the rates of fatal opioid overdoses were significantly lower in states that had legalized medical cannabis. 25% lower rate of overdose. Like, that's huge. More of what our government knows. This is a drug fact sheet listed on the DEA's website. Anyone can look this up. There is a little section I highlighted of overdose effects. No death from overdose of marijuana has been reported. Peanuts have killed more people than